On a scorching June morning in 1876, the Montana sun rose over what would become America's most infamous battlefield. Before it set, 268 U.S. soldiers would lie dead in the grass, their commander's body riddled with arrows, his golden hair matted with blood. But the story of the Little Bighorn isn't just about one man's last stand. It's about brothers who died side by side, wives who waited in vain, and warriors who fought to preserve their way of life. This is not just a tale of defeat. It's a story of devotion, destruction, and destinies forever altered on the banks of a quiet river. When Custer discovered his column had been spotted approaching the Little Bighorn by a small band of warriors, he made the decision to launch a two-pronged attack on the Indian village. It was at that precise moment that the fate of the men of the 7th Cavalry was sealed. One of survivors of the Custer battle was a horse called Comanche, belonging to Captain Miles Keogh. The horse was found with several gunshot wounds and was nearly put down. However, he was nursed back to health and died in 1891. No one was ever permitted to ride him again. Many of the 7th Cavalry's troopers were new recruits. They'd had limited training, were poor horsemen, and had never been engaged in battle before. A number of the troopers in the regiment were born in Ireland and Germany, with a scattering of other nationalities. Major Marcus Reno, Custer's second-in-command, was publicly accused of cowardice following Custer's defeat. In response, Reno wrote directly to President Rutherford Hayes requesting a court of inquiry which was held in Chicago in 1879. Reno was cleared and faced no further action. Custer trained as a cadet at West Point, where he was judged a very poor student, coming last out of a class of 34. If it had not been for the Civil War, it is very likely he would have ended up at some godforsaken post in the middle of nowhere and never heard of again. The 7th Cavalry under Custer was seriously fractured at officer level. Some were very loyal to Custer, whilst others couldn't stand him. Since Captain Benteen was in the latter camp, could that have affected his actions at the Little Bighorn? The Indian village along the Little Bighorn was massive, and by far the biggest anyone had ever seen before. It was said to be 3 miles long and 1 mile wide, with at least 7,000 Indians camped there. What thoughts raced through Custer's mind when he finally realized all hope was lost, and he and the men around him would not live to see another day? Was it regret he'd ignored the numerous warnings of his Indian scouts about the size of Indian village he was heading for? If it had not been for the quick thinking of Major Reno halting his charge, it is highly probable he and his men would have been wiped out if they had ridden just another 100 yards towards the Indian village where Indians came swarming out to engage them. The Lakota Sioux was made up of 7 subdivisions: Hunkpapa, Oglala, Blackfeet, Brule, Two Kettles, Sans Arc, Minneconjou. Each set up its own camp within the massive 3-mile-long village along the Little Bighorn, with an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 warriors. Lieutenant Benjamin Hodgson, a West Point graduate and Custer's adjutant, met his fate amid the chaos at Little Bighorn. His horse was shot from under him near Medicine Tail Coulee. As he attempted to escape on foot, a Lakota warrior's bullet found its mark. His last words to a fellow soldier were simply, "Goodbye, boys." The bodies of 3 officers could not be found after the battle, and to this day no one knows what became of them. 3 officers vanished without a trace. They were First Lieutenant James Porter, Second Lieutenant James Sturgis, and Second Lieutenant Henry Harrington. Gone. No bodies, no graves, no answers. Isaiah Dorman was the only African American at the Little Bighorn. He was wounded, then killed during Major Reno's retreat from the timber. Because of the thick smoke from gunfire and the dust churned up by Indian ponies, it was sometimes difficult to make out friend from foe during the battle. Indians reported seeing some warriors lying dead after the battle, struck by arrows from their own side. Custer made a number of crucial mistakes on the lead-up to the battle at the Little Bighorn. But perhaps his biggest mistake was a failure to assess the fighting strength of the enemy before engaging in battle, leading to the U.S. Army's biggest defeat of the Indians' wars. It has proved difficult to ascertain how many Indians were killed at the Little Bighorn since the bodies were removed by families following the battle. Estimates vary from between 30 and 160. However, Crazy Horse put the number at 58. It is believed 60 Indians were also wounded. The 7th Cavalry did not carry sabers with them to the Little Bighorn. To stop the sound of rattling sabers warning the Indians of their presence as they rode along, Custer ordered them stored away in a wagon, thereby leaving the soldiers defenseless if they ran out of ammunition. The U.S. cavalry would often dismount when engaging an enemy, forming a skirmish line with troopers positioned 5 yards apart. Every fourth man held the reins of his own horse and those of 3 of his comrades, thereby reducing their fighting capability. The 7th Cavalry's blood-stained guidon was discovered by Sergeant Ferdinand Culbertson lying beneath the body of Corporal John Foley shortly after the Little Bighorn battle. 12 months after the battle at the Little Bighorn, the remains of 5 officers were exhumed and taken to Fort Leavenworth, where they were reinterred with full military honors. The officers' names were Thomas Custer, George Yates, James Calhoun, Donald McIntosh, Algernon Smith. When General Terry's column arrived 2 days after the battle, they were met with the most appalling sight. The naked, decomposing bodies of soldiers lay with dead horses over the battlefield. Most had been scalped, decapitated, and dismembered, leaving many bodies unrecognizable. The Little Bighorn battle was in fact 2 separate battles. One on the Custer battlefield and the other 4 miles away on the bluffs overlooking the Little Bighorn, with Major Reno's command holding off Indian attacks for 2 days before General Terry's column finally arrived. Custer's sister, Margaret, suffered the greatest tragedy of all, losing 5 members of her family in the battle: 3 brothers, George, Tom, and Boston, nephew Henry Audie Reed, and her husband, First Lieutenant James Calhoun, on that fateful day. Custer's naked body was discovered in a sitting position, propped up against a dead horse. He was found with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the temple and the other below his heart, either of which would have proved fatal. He was neither scalped or mutilated, as other soldiers were. There were a surprising number of soldiers awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for gallantry during the Little Bighorn battle. 24 medals in total were awarded to 16 privates, 6 sergeants, 2 blacksmiths. Company D received the most at 7. Around 60 children were left fatherless at Fort Abraham Lincoln following Custer's defeat at the Little Bighorn. Custer's Army rank at the Battle of the Little Bighorn was Lieutenant Colonel. However, since he was appointed Brevet Major General during the American Civil War, he was often addressed as General, which was common practice at that time for those having had a more senior rank. Captain Benteen had an intense dislike of Custer from the very first moment they met. This animosity intensified after Custer failed to go to the aid of a troop being massacred by Cheyenne at the Battle of the Washita, where Benteen's fellow officer and friend was killed. There has been lots of speculation over who killed Custer at the Little Bighorn. Northern Cheyenne tradition tells us it was in fact Buffalo Calf Road Woman who allegedly struck Custer the fatal blow with a war club, although this does appear inconsistent with his injuries. In 1995, the wedding ring of First Lieutenant Donald McIntosh was found near the very spot where he was killed at the Little Bighorn. The ring bears the initials DM and MM on the inside for Donald and his wife Molly, and the numerals 66 for 1866, the year they were wed.